Hey everybody, it's me again, Chris, and we're going to continue on the last thing that we actually did. If you guys recall, we created an ASP.NET website that connected to a MySQL database for allowing people to actually register their accounts to actual sample web page and to actually log into that same web page. So without further ado, let me just kind of go over it again, guys. Um, if we recall, we actually made this simple database here, or I should say simple ASP.NET application. It is not HTML or CSS heavy. This is just bare bones HTML, but most of what we did actually was just to show how the code behind um, works. So let's actually go ahead. I'm going to try to log in. It's my name right there. Invalid user, and if you guys remember why, over here we have the MySQL workbench, we have the web app demo database, and we actually have a couple tables here, and you'll see that there is no row entry where the first name or the username is Chris and last name is Duran, or I should say password as Duran. But if we went ahead and try to log in with somebody who actually exists in the database, you'll see that the person is in. Hello, Roger Andy Anderson. I know it's a bad name. Sorry, guys. I could have picked something better, but I was just lazy at the time. But what I actually want to do before kind of continuing on is to create something simple, just a simple logout button, because that'll help. Instead of me having to close the application and starting it up again, we can just kind of do a little logout right here. So let me go ahead and create a new button, logout button. We want it to say logout, so we know what the person expects. Very easy for them to tell what it does. And we're going to create a hook into the CSS, or I should say the C sharp code behind page. And we're just going to call the method logout event method. So close out the tag there. And we're going to go into the code behind page. And we're going to go ahead and create this method. So even though all event handler methods contain these two parameters, it is not used really in this tutorial, at least for logging out. So what we actually want to do is go ahead and actually set the session to null. And if you guys recall in the first tutorial, in the default page, once the person was actually connected, we passed in their first name, middle name, and last name into a session variable called uname. You can see up here it's actually extracted and stored into a local string variable, which is then just displayed onto the screen. And that's where you actually saw the person's full name, Roger Andy Anderson. So what we want to do right now is just set it to null. And what we want to do also is to actually say session.abandon, which basically clears all the memory resources related to that session. And as with most people, or at least as with most websites, as soon as somebody actually logs out, they'll just be redirected to the home page. So what we're going to do here is just do these 2 lines of code. And this first entry here, as I mentioned last time, is just basically the link plus the page that you actually wanted to be directed to. But since this default ASPX file is on the same um, level directory as this login page, that's all we have to do there. And now that we actually set something to null, I want to add another check up here in the page load. If name equals null, I want to redirect them back to the home page. Else it's just going to go ahead and print the user's name. So let me just copy these 2 lines of code, and there. So now we created an actual logout button, and just so you guys can see, it'll try to go into the login page because that's the page we actually tried to click run on. But since we actually have that if name equals null, it redirects us back into the home page. So let's go ahead and log in with the second person in the database. There you go. You're logged in, Jesse John Johnson. and we can do the same thing with the other person. That's not even necessary. You guys already saw that. But what I actually want to talk about next, guys, is I want to talk about the default code behind page here, and how it is very bad in the sense that when a person clicks login, the application pretty much doesn't do any checks. It doesn't do any sanitization of the actual user inputs, and that is very bad because the person can put something maliciously and it would compromise your website, will compromise the database, and you don't want that to happen. And when I say compromise, the one technique that hackers could use is actually use SQL injection. So what we're going to do here is, as a little sample, you guys already saw before, I try to log in with my name. Application tries to check the database. I am not there, so I have the application basically say invalid user. I could have put this in a label, but I was lazy and just put it in a text box. But watch this, guys. What if I actually try this? I was able to log in. And actually, before I continue on, what I like to do, I like to make things a little bit more bite-sized. I'm going to have the submit event be calling another method that does all of this SQL query into the database. And of course, since we're dealing with MySQL connection strings and MySQL command variables, we want to do a try catch just to catch any kind of exception that may happen, because they do happen. Whatever exception there may be, I'm just going to go ahead and be lazy and put it into the actual password text box field. Just going to go ahead and grab this code. And there we go. So let me go ahead and just call it from here. Let's run it again. You guys already saw before, or 1 equals 1. I was able to log in. We're actually able to see the Jesse John Johnson account. And what if we try something else? What if we try this? We're able to actually log in and get into Roger Andy Anderson's account. And as you guys well know, those two funny lines of strings that we put in for the text box for the password, they don't exist here. What the heck is happening? As mentioned before, guys, this is actually SQL injection, and it is very harmful because a hacker can steal all of the person's credentials and get their personal information. So kind of just a little brief overview exactly. SQL injection. What is SQL injection? Is basically modifying the SQL query that the code actually has to write into the database. The database itself, or web application, has a username and a password text box field. It's expecting you to put a username and a password, uh, for you to actually try to log in with. So it's actually expecting two string variables, but SQL injection is tricking the application by adding an SQL query instead of an actual valid password or username. And so you change the SQL query from something basic, something simple, into something malicious. What I mean by that is, as mentioned, most websites that have user accounts obviously would need them to log in, so they have a username and a password. I just have a screenshot here down below of my simple website there, but the bare minimum SQL query that an application does to actually get into a database as per a user's credentials is this line of code here. Select star from database name dot database table, where the username, this username is actually a column in the database table, equals what the person put in the username text box, and what the password column in the database table equals that. In SQL injection, you basically, well, actually, let me kind of backtrack there. So say a person actually puts in gdarren as his username and darren1234, or in our case, what we did in this application, we did roger and roger123. This basic query at runtime as soon as a person selects submit or login, changes it to select star from database where username equals gdarren and password equals darren1234. If that person exists in the database, this statement is true, and then your application will actually get everything from that database with regards to that person's account. If it doesn't exist, uh, basically SQL database won't return anything, and your application should be able to handle it by just saying invalid username, as I did in my application. What happens here is when we actually added that or 1 equals 1, what we're doing is we're changing the query from what we saw in the previous page to be select star from database where the username equals blank and password equals blank or 1 equals 1. As you guys saw in the database over here, there is no entry. There's only 2 entries right now. This third one is just a line of row nulls. There is no username and password entry where it's both blank, so that returns false. So you wouldn't get anything at all from the database. But the database then tries to interpret this or 1 equals 1. It's a separate statement. 1 always equals 1. As simple and obvious as that sounds, if you don't actually check the user input, the SQL database will actually see, oh, this is a valid command. Let me give them everything that they asked for, as as we stated in the select star. So you could use 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, A equals A. It's a basic comparison that always returns true, and that's dangerous, of course, because as mentioned before, you basically hacked into a person's or website's database, and you actually can ruin the financial near-term future, and that's just not something you want to actually happen to your actual application. So the good news is, guys, is that there's ways to actually get around it, and when I say get around it, there's ways to protect against it. One of them is actually by creating a whitelist regular expression check, where you actually check the user's input against a valid set of characters that your application only will accept and nothing else. So what we're going to do here actually is create another check or another boolean or another method, check against whitelist. We're going to take in the user's inputs, and what we're going to do over here, guys, is create a simple regular expression. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you what the expression will actually be looking for. Just give me a second while I type it out. Okay, there we go. Basically, this regular expression is basically allowing anything that is just lowercase letters, uppercase letters, and numbers. Or numbers, I should say. So anything that's outside of that, if it's an equal sign, if it's a single quote, as we saw before in the SQL injection string, this should return false. So before we actually go any further, let me kind of just finish off this method. It's going to take the user input as a parameter and say, does this input parameter match this regular expression? If it does, everything is good. Return true. If it doesn't, it is not a valid input, and we return false. So what we're going to do here in a submit button event, instead of going ahead and calling the method to do the SQL query, we're going to go ahead and put the user's input to the test. We're going to pass in the username text box, make sure it's true, and we're also going to check it against the password. If they both turn out to be true, then they're both valid inputs. Doesn't mean that the person actually exists in a database, but at least the application knows it's a clean input. It's not trying to do anything malicious. Else, and then it's going to piggyback on the password text box field. and just write does not pass whitelist test. Okay, so there we go. How about we go ahead and run this again. So let's go ahead and this is a legit user. The input strings is clean. There's no special characters, no quotes. Let's do with the other guy there that exists. Clean. Let's try my name again. Invalid user, he doesn't exist in the database. How about we go ahead and try that SQL injection technique. Does not pass whitelist test. How about the other one? Again, it doesn't pass it. And if you guys recall, it's because either one of these I actually have a single quote or an equal sign, and in this case I have a semicolon too. If you look at the regular expression, I'm only accepting lowercase letters, uppercase, and or letters, or I should say numbers. And those two SQL injection techniques require single quote and an equal sign. Another one actually accepts or needs the semicolon, so this will fail, and hence you protect it against an SQL injection technique. But that's not the only thing you should do to actually check against malicious input. There's another way you can actually check against malicious input, and that is in the actual SQL query string that you formulate in the do SQL query method. So just showing you guys real quick, commenting out the whitelist check, we're able to get in. It's not good. So let's go back to the code. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and comment these 2 lines of or 3 lines of code out. First off, let me stop the application from running. I want to copy this again. I don't want to lose what I typed already, so I'm just leaving it there for comparison purposes. But one thing that we're going to do over here, guys, is instead of putting in the user's name text box right in that query string right there, what we're going to do is actually put a little placeholder, and the syntax is just question mark, and you just create, I guess, a new placeholder name, uname. You can put username. Don't make it match the actual column in the database, but this is fine for now. And we're going to do the same thing for the password, p-word. Okay, we just created 2 placeholders, and what we're going to do right now is after this command being initialized, we're going to add those parameters afterwards. It's a little hack to actually combat the hack, the SQL injection technique. And what we're going to do here is it accepts 2 strings. The first string is the actual placeholder that we put up there in the original query string. So we're going to put uname, and the second string is the actual parameter data that you actually want to put in. So this time we just want to actually put in the actual username text box field. Let me go over here, and I want to do the same thing with the password. So I forgot to put the question mark as part of the placeholder name. Okay, and basically what this does, it basically treats the user's input string as an actual string. It doesn't try to interpret it as an SQL query, just in case the person actually puts in an SQL query instead of an actual valid username or password. So if you go ahead, let's run this again. I want you guys to see the before and after. Let's log in with Jesse John. We're able to log in. He's a valid user. Let's go with my name. It's invalid user because I don't exist in the database. Let's try Roger. He's in. Now let's try the SQL injection technique. Invalid user, invalid user. And again, you see that that add with parameter values again just treats it as a string. So instead of trying to interpret that and execute an SQL query if that's what you entered in, the application just basically says, okay, does a password exist where or 1 equals 1? No. So then your application should just basically receive a false statement from the SQL database, or I should say you should receive like no actual data, and then you should just proceed to say just invalid user and or password. So if we go ahead, stop this application, and I want to keep that there, but let's add the whitelist check. It's a good rule of thumb, I would say, just to include all security measures. We saw that the whitelist test pretty much invalidates certain special characters, and we saw how the adding with parameter value using the placeholder for the query string itself protected against it, but you kind of want to have both in there. It's always better, makes your application more secure and more safe. And if we kind of go back into the program, you'll see that your application is safe now. It does not pass the whitelist test, or I should say it's safe for this user input form. There's many other ways hackers can hack into your or just mess with your web application, but this is one less thing you'd have to worry about if you implement it as such. Um, at least the validation or user sanitation of the user input in your web application. So let's go ahead and try Roger again. It's good. So you can see there, guys, that by including the whitelist check and this small little hack that came with this class here, that we're able to help protect against SQL injection on the main page login. So hopefully that was entertaining, or I should say educational, guys. I know this helped me out a lot, just looking at the web to find all this information, and hope this makes sense. Okay, thanks, guys.